Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 24th edition of Coffee with Ashish. And today we have got a special guest with us, Mr. JB Singh, who's President and CEO of Interglobe Group of Hotels. And before we get into conversations with JB and Ashish, on this show, we are almost going to be having our Silver Jubilee on Thursday this week. But among all the products we have spoken about, accommodation is one product in which I think we've been lucky to have conversation with a very melange sort of diverse people. So we've looked at international, hotel aggregators. We have looked at budget hotel categories. We have looked at alternate accommodations like Airbnb. But I think one of the categories which I personally, as a corporate traveler, relate to the most is the sort of smart, affordable, yet a bit of a luxury segment, which I think is a very hard sweet spot to achieve for most of the operators around the world. And I think that's one category in which JB's company operates. And but the reason that category is notorious is because as a consumer, the expectations are pretty much of a super uber luxury experience, but you also want it to be affordable, smart, in the right location. So it's a very hard mix, and many times customers tend to get odd experiences while trying to experiment and grapple with such properties. And as always, I have a couple of cartoons to show you to capture this emotion. That's how typically on the extreme left, if you see, the name of the hotel is actually five-star hotel, but it's not a five-star hotel. And on the right, you see where the location is committed. That is just a mile from the beach and doesn't tell you if it's latitudinally or longitudinally from the mile. And on the extreme right, you see that you replace the proverbial chocolate with the candy to keep it affordable. So, on a more serious note, I think that's the hard category which many people have tried to cater to, but I think most of them have failed miserably to capitalize on that opportunity. And I think Interglobe Hotels, and it's a very interesting journey if you see, right? It was a joint venture between Interglobe Enterprises and Accor Asia Pacific. The idea was to develop a network of hotels, which they brand as IBIS Group of Hotels across India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh in entire Southeast Asia. And currently, they have a portfolio of almost 24 hotels with 4,800 odd hotel rooms. And that's not it. I mean, they have a big budget commitment, and they are going to be coming up in the next few years with 4 to 5 more hotels with a capacity of 1,100 odd hotel rooms. And I was reading also JB's interview in a editorial where he said that India in general in this category has got a very low supply compared to when you talk about London or Dubai or Las Vegas. So I think that's a very interesting space to operate in, which is the mid market and smart hotels category. And the idea is that they make it affordable, smart, in a good location, but also take care of very important things which are for the new age traveler, like sustainability, energy efficiency, and all the projects are solar powered. And when they are when they are constructed, they keep a close eye on the sustainability of the entire terrain around the project, which is pretty interesting. And I think it's really amazing to see, JB, that the company has been growing on a CAGR of close to 30%, whereas the other hotel categories and accommodation categories have not been growing at the same pace. So it's really amazing under JB's leadership that the group has expanded and outperformed their peers in the market. And JB, himself is a seasoned leader in the industry with an experience of more than 35 years across hotels, airlines, large travel intermediaries he has worked with, including WorldSpan, Jet Air, Scandinavian Airlines, and British Airlines. And under his leadership, truly in the last 10 years or so, this group has really expanded in this mid-market smart hotel category. And apart from business, it's very interesting to read about you, JB, that you also I know he's a fitness freak. He starts his day with yoga and doesn't mind going to the gym as well in the evening. And no wonder why, with 35 years of experience still, he's got the charm and glow of a 35-year-old. So I think that now we know his secret. And he's also, interestingly, does a lot of pro bono mentorship for startups, for SMEs, and also football teams. And he's into sports as well. And on that note, JB, I also, before I hand you over to Ashish, I also wanted to take a small quiz and show you a picture and see if you remember this picture. This is 25 years ago, where you were in the cricket match with the other gentlemen we have in our show, Ashish, and
Yeah.
Maninder and Ajay Jadeja was
JP,
there. So I hope you
How
recollect.
wonderful. Yes.
JP, that's the sixth side, Jet sixth side
Yeah.
with piano
Yeah.
travel one.
We used to run this in Jet Airways, I remember. And
Right.
Maninder's there. He used
Yeah,
to come and
Maninder.
compare for us. Wonderful.
So with this, a very warm welcome to you, JB, on the show. And I'm going to hand it over to Ashish to have a conversation with you while I sit back and enjoy my coffee.
Thank you, Karthik.
JP, how's your coffee?
Oh,
Good.
doing well. Thank you, Ashish.
You know, when you look at photographs spanning back 25 years, I mean, we all look at each other and say, oh, how we have changed, or how good times we were, and all that reflection. But what we don't do really, and we come from the travel industry, is to look back 25 years and say, how did the trade operate then? How did we do our business then? And how are we doing the business today? And if you just pair it, many things will amaze and shock you, the way we did our business earlier. But those were the times and we did our business.
Yes.
And we sit today in the COVID times. And when I ask you, JB, can you look ahead and what do you see the next few years like? I think if you go back in that context, if I'd asked you the same question 25 years ago, I don't know what answer you would have given me, but I do want to ask you, in the hospitality and tourism, how do you see the next few years spanning out?
You know, it's going to be, Ashish, a very complex time. As we get deeper into this, there are multiple things that are unfolding in front of us. I think hospitality is struggling and will continue to struggle for a bit, which means a couple of things are going to happen. Balance sheets are going to get really stressed out. So whatever gets out on the other side will have a very stressed balance sheet. The industry in itself in India owes close to 45,000 crores to the banks. So that's anywhere given. We all know in many senses, for whatever reasons, and we can talk about it later in this talk, the industry is overcapitalized, whether it's stuff imposed by the brands or which is inefficient policies. So the industry is anyway carrying substantial extra burden. Couple that with high interest rates, it all starts to get a bit sort of tough. So that's one side that's going to happen. What else is going to happen? You've got COVID starting to accelerate change. Customer demand, customer behavior, just trying to understand the mix of demand and the size of demand is going to be very, very challenging. So I think to simplify this, 2 or 3 big things will happen. One, we are going to get the customer back in the center of the game. So the customer is going to become very central to this industry once again. People will have to look far out into the future and start to imagine a new style of product, a new sort of capital structure for this kind of a business. So the returns are adequate. Government will have to create agile policies to make the business agile and so on. In the short term, I think it's going to be very opportunistic business over the next 6 months. It's going to be stuff which is going to be intra-city, intra-state. As people get more confidence, they will travel intra-country, within the country. It's going to be a sort of a low sort of a lift off. But there's one thing I tell everybody. As much as what COVID has given us, we must not also lose sight of where we were in February. That's the latent demand where we left the market at till it went into a kind of a free fall. Now, whilst it'll take us possibly 18 to 24 months to get to the pre-COVID sort of Feb 2020 time, I'm pretty optimistic about what's going to happen thereon. And that's obviously based on the assumption that we should get out of it. That's what all the pundits say. That's what all our numbers say. We should be in some sort of a good, better, or sort of a similar situation in 24 months. There's huge investments coming into India, where there's the energy sector, healthcare sector. There's enough work going on around the whole events piece, making it an events market, and in trying to build tourism infrastructure. I think this is a great time for the industry to work very closely with the government and build policy that can help us accelerate as we get out of the tunnel.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, Ashish, it's going to be a slow run up.
Yeah.
I think everyone needs to get real about it. It's going to be financial stress, and it's an 18 to 24-month haul.
I think the COVID would filter what you don't want over a period of time, I'm sure. But three words which get touted and spoken occasionally in the webinars are responsibility, transparency, agility. What do they mean to you in your context of what you're doing?
I think it is fundamental, Ashish. It's not that these things did not exist. But, COVID, like you said, is going to accelerate the future in many ways. And I've said this time and again, compliant businesses will gain out of this. Businesses that have been transparent, have worked closely with government laws, have built all the right infrastructure. Right. They're agile, they build reserves, they have quality manpower, they have quality leaders. They're going to get on the other side. But here's what's going to happen. Post-COVID, or even during COVID, and I'm saying during COVID because this could go on for a while, the demand for compliant products is going to rise. And I think as we get out of it, demand of compliant products is going to be paramount. Not just from the customer's perspective, but also from the investor's perspective. So I think when investors are looking at placing capital in this market, they're going to look out for products or organizations, whether it's our business or whether it's any business, which can withstand these kind of shocks, because, I think it's reasonable for us to assume these things could happen again, or it could be in some other way, it could be some other planet kind of story, it could be localized, global, whichever way. And investors are going to look for safety or capital, right, and are going to look for businesses that are maintaining and understanding their risks in the market, and they're providing for those risks in the market, they're respecting the laws, and they are sort of going to sort of abide by what the customer wants. And as the customer becomes centric, who comes from within the same ecosystem, that customer is also going to seek products that are compliant, that are friendly to the planet, that sort of work with local communities, and has a sort of a higher order and a higher purpose of work.
Right. JB, when I talk to hoteliers, I generally land up talking from a brick and mortar dimensional hotel kind of perspective. With you sitting there, I don't know where to fit you in, because I see you as a GDS distribution man. I see you as we saw that photograph of Jet Airways, and I see you as a hotelier. In that multi-facet environment, I've always believed one thing, not only in the COVID times, but even earlier, that the whole universe of travel, the whole ecosystem of travel will have to evolve into one entity of distribution. So therefore, with your kind of experience, how do you see this play out in terms of digitalization, distributions, the new channels, the networks which will evolve? I mean, the whole piece, and obviously the hotel, where does it fit in? One last word before we talk about digitalization. And you and I know that when the first aggregation of hotel space was set in for domestic, Dacia did that. And challenge remains even till today, that the hotels are just responsible for giving price and inventory, and rest they've left it to whoever is aggregating it to do it. But obviously inside the hotel, there is an investment on technology, etc. But it is not necessarily reflecting in the distribution model. So, I mean, that's where I'm leading the whole question to.
Ashish, digitization is possibly one trend that has accelerated in the last, 6 months. I mean, we are in that mode right now, and it's and many others. I don't want to get into that. This is one trend that actually existed, and peripheral technologies that were invested over the last 20, 30, 40 years, including GDSs, that started out very early, have become a very powerful sort of a web of communication networks. That's on one side.
Right.
And then if we see what's happened in the last 10, 15 years as mobile commerce has taken off, which really, I mean, I call it being empowered. We've empowered the customer to take decisions. How decisions get taken have changed. Customer behavior has changed. And the industry has to understand that. I think the hospitality industry is still has a lot of work to do in that space. And right now, I'm just talking about the front end of the business.
Yes, yeah.
Today, decisions get taken on the go. They get taken on the phone. They get taken, through multiple channels that people can access, whether it's Instagram, whether it's all kinds of things, which are all sort of enabled through multiple feeds coming from direct APIs, coming from GDSs, and so on. And this is going to become bigger and bigger. There is also a big rush to get to the customer directly. The quality of imaging that happens has to start to change. How marketing looks at what is going to be put out there has to change.
Yeah,
is virtual going to take over? Today, you can take virtual tours of museums, and in some hotels, you can take virtual tours of hotels to make a sort of a driving decision. So customer acquisition, customer experience is all going completely digital. We are in that whole storm of the whole digital space exploding. But equally importantly, when you get to the back end of the business, there's a massive amount of technology that's going to come into the hospitality business. We are already working on many things.
Right.
Supply chains will need to get automated. Our businesses inside will need to be automated on how we run our buildings, our consumption patterns, our procurement, our data on customers, our CRMs, on how we manage and engage with our customers. And there's one third element which technology will create by bringing businesses which are outside our domain and create intersection points.
Yeah.
It could be the shopping business. I mean, look at Dubai Shopping Festival. It could be a variety of business. Today, they are all run in a brick and mortar way, whether it's medical tourism or anything. But technology will sort of enable cross-business feeds as well and find common ways to sell products bundled together. And that will also drive a lot of ancillary revenues. After all, that's one area that the hotels have talked about. The airline business today touches $100 billion. It provides almost 12% of revenue to the airline business globally. AirAsia today looks at their website, as gets 20 million footfalls on their website, and they're looking at that as a business model in itself. So this is one area where a lot of work needs to be done, and I think we'll see a lot of it.
Yeah. Just to add, Karthik here, who comes from a non-travel background, and he looks at it from an engineering perspective. He asked me a question one day that, when I can book an airline seat in advance, why can't he fill out the registration form for the hotel? Why should he be lining up in the front office and saying, I have a room with you? And that's just a case and example, because the entire data is given when you're booking it. The keys, of course, can be distributed out when you enter. That's another matter.
Yeah.
That's just an example. So I think the hotels will have to now gear up and meet up to the change of meeting the customer rather than the customer meeting them. Right? And there are services within the hotels which should be able to be booked or experienced even before you enter the hotel. And obviously, I'm a great one here now, JB, just to leave that thought before I move to the next question, is on the flexibility of the tariff. I think the hotel business across being too rigid on a 12 o'clock check-in and a 12 o'clock checkout. My check-in and checkout should really be working in the way when I check in and I check out. Perhaps we will see that flexibility happening going forward. But looking back at the hotels you operate in particularly, and in the destinations you are, do you see, what role do you see yourself playing to create the demand for the destination itself, leaving aside the hotels? Are you working closely with the destinations to be able to create that demand? Because creation of demand is a very big factor now.
So I think, Ashish, I have to give it to the hospitality industry. They have worked very closely with sort of tourism boards and used their property as a platform to sort of promote destinations, whether, it's in early marketing, in sort of positioning hotels as destinations. I mean, we've got enough examples. We've got leisure hotels, let's say in Jaipur, in Goa, all our commercials, all our sort of collaterals are sort of, is with the destination woven around, with the food, the cuisine. Even when hotels get designed, there's always an effort to bring in local colors, local themes. And in fact, now we are also picking traditional art and giving it a fusion twist to make it more relevant to younger travelers that we see a lot now, and that'll continue to grow to a great extent. A lot of hotels, when you travel across, do bring in cultural events and things like that. They participate in F&B events across the country, taking road shows to different events and showcasing destinations.
Right.
It's a very, very integral part of how hotels actually sell. But I'm sure we can do more, and I'm sure there is always that opportunity to work even closer with sort of with the government. In fact, areas like even micro markets, like let's say AeroCity,
right?
There is a need there to work closely with the AeroCity folks, with all the hotels, trying to promote that destination, AeroCity as a destination for not just lodging but for food, entertainment, and shopping and so on. So to collaborate cross-industry is very, very important.
Yeah, like I said, you got to be part of the entire universe of travel and promote it in totality, of course. I've been on a couple of webinars where you've been there as well, and hoteliers have obviously talked about electricity charges, cost of land acquisition, being recognized as an industry. But do you really see institutional investors will be adverse to coming into India? Or how do you see that coming in the future? Although you said that everybody is looking at India, but still, do you see that happening?
So I think it's a mixed bag here, Ashish. I think India has over the years built that attractiveness, and we've seen transactions coming from institutional investors within the country, largely driven by capacity. India today has only about 130, 140,000 classified rooms. And then we know that India is going to sort of grow, and this capacity is, it's underpenetrated, and you need more capacity. So that's one thing that sort of starts to bring institutional investors in. The average room rates across the industry is about $100. It should get up to a couple of $100 over time. So there is an arbitrage for institutional investors. But that's a very small churn. So there are bigger issues that need to be fixed. The biggest one around is the whole policy thing. But I'll get to the policy in a bit. India needs, if you look at large markets, some of the key drivers for those large markets to fill in hotel rooms is around events, around regional tourism, and around medium haul tourism.
Yeah.
And then, of course, clearly very strong tourism products. And then, big events that will sort of run in those markets. Whether it's trade fairs, whether it's sporting events, exhibitions, and so on. That infrastructure needs to be sort of built simultaneously to create the right demand drivers. And all investors are looking at that. How and when will those demand drivers come up? Some efforts are being made, but still taking time. But on the policy side, there's still large amount of inefficiencies that sit in the market. If I was to sort of just put a loose number, there are enough efficiencies that almost 20 to 30% efficiencies that could be driven by just addressing policies in a non-fiscal manner. Just approvals, licensing and approvals. I think we've heard about it, for years now. It can take you about 18 months. A large project, a burn of 18 months can cost you 20, 30 crores just on interest carrying costs. That's a big inefficiency. How our land use is sort of designed, it's very inefficient. Throw into the mix the number of car parks that we need to build as opposed to anywhere else in the world. Our car parking needs are just absolutely enormous. So once you bundle all these inefficiencies in, throw in the high interest rates that exist in the market, and then the lack of the adequate demand drivers around all the stuff we spoke about before, you start to see something that may not be as attractive as we want it to be in the immediate term. If we were to just sort the policy bit out, which I think is a perfect time now, because now is the time that we can sort of slow down to go fast. They are not very complex, or maybe they are indeed, because they also, the other problem is it touches too many sort of state laws, municipal laws, central. It's a big mix. And somebody needs to, or rather we need to, as an industry, find a way out of this labyrinth and find the sweet spot and say, okay, this industry needs to be put on the fast track. If that itself gets fixed, and that will bring in supply, and if simultaneously these demand drivers, the medium and long-term demand drivers around events and so on, are sort of created. Look at some of these demand drivers. I mean, we had Formula One, right? It's a classic example.
Yeah.
And it was there, the investments were made. Today, Formula One is a big demand driver in Singapore and many other countries where it happens.
Right.
And then those tracks get used for all kinds of other events,
Right.
and they start to demand, sort of drive demand. So we need to come up with one or two big ones like that. I don't know, Disneyland, whatever, or something similar. Look how some of these markets like Malaysia grew. They said, okay, golf's going to be our destination, 200 golf courses. Of course, they put gambling out there as well to sort of peak demand and get people. If we need demand drivers on one side, we need sound policy to accelerate supply and build in the tourism infrastructure, around safety, around ground transportation. We have all the national heritage, we have all the marine coasts and everything to work on. That's all. Fix the demand, fix the supply through policy, and I think we will have a big industry running out here.
Right. JB, I agree the policy changes are a big subject to-do list. It should happen. I mean, being in the industry that I have been for 40 years, call me ignorant, call me whatever, I didn't realize that you could actually fly from Delhi to Bombay in 30 minutes less than you were doing.
Yes.
And I only discovered it that day when I heard it on the television.
Yes.
Right? And you coming from an airline can well realize what it means in terms of, forget the cost of fuel, etc., but turning around a flight, getting more flights in the air and so on.
And it's been in the works for years.
Look at that. So obviously policy changes are something which, and I think that's necessarily, I do believe that leadership in the travel industry across have to be playing a collective role to tell the government, to talk to the government that this is what we want in terms of policy and strategy. I'm sure they're doing it, but it has to be a constant chip. Then simple thing as defer this and defer that. Obviously, you need to defer this and defer that because of what you've been hit today. But I think moving forward, policy needs to be on top of the agenda. But lastly, before I move you back to Karthik, I mean, as a leader, obviously you have your own paradoxes as to how to build a future-proof organization going from here. We've talked about how you will overcome. So, I mean, what are your plans to build this into a future-proof leadership organization? You've done well so far, but how does it continue beyond you?
Well, I think it's important for us to understand what leaders of the future need now. I think leaders of the future need to deal with several paradoxes. Do they need to go slow, and when they need to go fast? Do we go slow to go fast? Do we go global, and how, if we go global, how do we remain local? Do we need to be agile? We need to be agile, but we need to take everyone along. So I think leaders need to be able to mobilize people, have a sense of purpose, authenticity, and transparency. I think these will be fundamental requirements for leaders who are to navigate us into the future. I think leaders also need to go into a big sort of a development program themselves, and leaders need to become cultivators of their own selves. And they must also look at the society. I think one thing that COVID has thrown up now is that we cannot ignore the society. We cannot ignore the environment. We've done that. I personally think it'll be quite interesting as the world opens up. How will we deal with the nice changes that the planet has brought us, with the blue skies and clear waters? Right. And how will we address that, from an environment perspective as we start to sort of open up? It's not going to be easy. The government's got a very, very, sort of a tough job. But I think from my perspective, in the middle of April, we put together a 60-day challenge in the company. We are already looking at the future ourselves. We've got work streams running, and it's our people who are creating those sort of environments on what our future product should look like, what should be the way we need to work, what should be our culture, how should our culture be around agility, what do we need to do with that. If we need to make things extreme in terms of ownership and commitment and speed, how do we measure that? We believe we have come up with a blueprint that's going to work, which we believe will give us a different lens to look at the business with lots of ancillary revenue opportunities,
Right.
fast decisions, putting the customer in the center of the business and imagining our products for the future. And at the same time, ensuring that we manage our cash, our current cash, and sort of bunker in and spend this time very, very efficiently with our monies, and keeping all these other balls in the air all together. So that's the blueprint I think we've built for ourselves. It's very important for us leaders at this time to be very, very transparent, give people the real story. That's very important. It's good to be optimistic, but I think in extreme crisis like that, it's even better to be real. So we need to get real, we need to be authentic, and we need to be open, and we need to ensure that every member, every stakeholder, whether it's our employees, colleagues, shareholders, government, everybody's engaged in this process. And we are listening to everyone and we are communicating. So that's the path that we are following, Ashish.
Well, thank you, JB. And I'm sure if we had 20 of you there, the industry will draw a lot of inspiration and hope from. And if I may move you back to Karthik, if he has an audience question before we wrap up, Karthik.
Thanks, JB. And it was very, heartening to hear you say these amazing things, and also the fact that companies that have been transparent and that have been working, with the process, they'll come out stronger. So I think that's going to be really something to look forward to. There's a small question and I also wanted to personally understand from you that this category, and I know wherever I have heard you talk about the business, you've always talked about this smart space mid-market opportunity, which you pride in promoting as Interglobe Hotels. But tell me, from the alternative accommodation options which people have now, and given the mindset of traveler is going to adapt in times to come, at least for the next 18 to 24 months, and the cost consciousness, staycations, and whatever is now happening as the new trend, and the lines between co-living and co-working are also blurring. How do you see this positioning of the product of the smart mid-market segment in accommodation which you operate in? How do you see that evolving, and how do you see Interglobe being positioned in that category?
So first of all, for ever so long, there were no products in this place. So this space was wide open. When I say the space was wide open, every time I talk about Interglobe, I talk about a fully compliant organization that is delivering world-class products for its customers. So first of all, the space was wide open. So when the company was sort of envisaged by our MD Rahul, he saw this space and he wanted the best player to come in. And that's how we went with Accor, who understood the space well. So that's one. So the idea was to recognize this entire marketplace that is asking for something which is of great value, international, safe, secure, best in class of hygiene, design, comfort, and so on. And if you really think about it, that's really what the customer is looking when they travel. The location has to be well appointed. It should be bang in a business district or a place of work or convenient. It should give you a world-class sleep. Right? The room condition should be fantastic. The food should be great. The hygiene and everything. Now, COVID actually, according to me, makes this even better in the sense that that's what customers want. They want a hygienic place. If you look at the Indian industry, it's a $23 billion revenue that the Indian industry does. 18 billion comes from the non-structured market, and 5 billion comes from the structured market, which obviously we are part of. And hotels which are not today compliant and are not built on solid platforms will need to ramp up. So they will need to put a lot of SOPs out there. They may need to restructure their buildings and so on. So that's one side of it, from the product side of it. And then from the operating side of it, to make sure that, you need to keep your costs under check. So you have, adequate arbitrage to create good margins. We have one of the best operating models. Our manning, the buildings are designed to make manning efficient. The buildings are designed to make energy efficient. And that keeps us, at a very good sort of an efficiency from a cost perspective. So I do believe that there's a lot of absorption in India. The customers love us. We have almost a 50 to 60% return sort of a profile of customers. And we also, another thing that we see, Karthik, is every time we open a hotel, they start to fill up much faster. Earlier, we used to say that the hotels will stabilize over 2 years or something. And we've seen hotels even stabilizing in 3 to 4 months. So the model works, and we are improving. We are bringing in better style products, more sort of aimed at people like you, your age group, who like smart up market products, good music, and great ambience. Good quick menus, smart menus. So I think it works, and we're going to continue to grow.
Great. On this positive note, I'm going to, Ashish, ask you for any concluding remarks before
No,
we close.
except JB, if the Chinese restaurant you took me to in your building is still there, I'll come in the next time we can actually physically.
Absolutely, Ashish. We'll do that for sure.
Right. Thank you for joining in today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Okay. Thanks, JB.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for joining in.
Bye.
We'll see
Bye,
you on
Karthik.
Thursday for our next session. Take care.